So, after about just 1 week of teasing and internet speculation, we finally know what Emio is, and it's not some grand horror game that's going to be made by Nintendo, the guys behind Mario and Kirby. It's not going to happen. It's no sequel to Eternal Darkness. It's nothing original. No, it is instead a very successful marketing campaign to announce a brand new Famicom Detective Club game, Emio the Smiling Man. And while there is a subset of the population out there who is disappointed, and I guess I can't really blame anybody for being disappointed because quite frankly, the Emio marketing was genius, and the fact that it circulated as far as it did, it had over 500,000 views, and then it was just for a sequel to Famicom Detective Club, like, that's kind of cool. But if you're disappointed, sure. For me, I like Famicom Detective Club a lot, actually. I bought both games digitally. I also imported the special edition that was Japanese only, so I get this nice big box and an art book. Like, I'm a fan. So the fact that this franchise that is, we're getting an entry for the first time in over 30 years, which is mental. This is also the very first time a rated M game is being made at Nintendo in-house. Not some other company that Nintendo is also publishing their game. Like, no, this is an in-house rated M game. I think these are all big deals, even if people are slightly disappointed. But that leads to a lot of big questions. Why go this above and beyond for Famicom Detective Club? Why didn't they just announce this at a Nintendo Direct? Well, for one, if they did, it would get overshadowed and people would forget about it a day after the Direct. That's just how it is. So, the right call in terms of how they announced this game. I like that a whole lot. But you may be wondering the legacy of this franchise. All you may know from the announcement video is that the Metroid guy, Yoshio Sakamoto, is working on this one, and he has this grand vision for the title. But what about the history of Famicom Detective Club? Let's go a little bit into it because I'm familiar, and I think you should be familiar too, because this is one of the deepest cuts in Nintendo history, and I think that should be celebrated. The origins of this franchise go all the way back to the original Famicom on the Famicom Disk System. These games did not get localized, but in Japan, they got two different games. They got basically the Missing Heir and The Girl Who Stands Behind. They have Japanese titles, but that is what the eventual Switch remix would go by, so for the sake of ease, we're just going to go with those titles. And they are mystery solving, usually solving a lot of murder cases, and visual novel form. There's the top left screen has a bit of a visual, the top right has the options that you can select, and the bottom shows all of the text. There's a decent amount of character personality going on because you see a lot of talking heads and you're interacting, and like, of course, it's a visual novel. Like, I don't need to explain what a visual novel is, but these titles just simply did not leave Japan. We got two titles that, interestingly enough, because of how the disc system worked, I guess, they were split across 2 discs each. So if you look on the wiki and you see 4 cases for 2 games, that would explain why. Each was released in 2 parts. Now, there are actually a decent amount of visual novels on the Famicom that just never got localized because that was not ever typically an overseas thing at the time. But this was Nintendo taking their own little swing at it and, tackling some pretty intense themes for a company that in the 90s, when it comes to localization, they were very strict about things like religion being in their games. They would go in and censor a lot of those things. To tackle a game that often featured very mature topics, it was pretty cool. But, because it never left Japan, barely anybody knew about it outside of Japan for the longest time. In fact, not only were these games inspired by a lot of detective novels back in the day, but there was also an adventure game by Enix called the Portopia Serial Murder Case that was a direct influence to Famicom Detective Club. Or I guess if you want to get technical, Famicom Tante Club is how it was known in Japan. But yeah, so it's not ultimately like this is the most original take in the world, but it's a Nintendo IP, so that does kind of elevate it just a little bit, because after this, things do get, just a smidge more interesting. In Japan, the games were reviewed pretty well, not super positive, but still good enough, and a lot of the praise was for the atmosphere. There were definitely some really good vibes going on in the Famicom Detective Club duology, and for the most part, as you may assume, there's only 2 games in this franchise, right? Well, that's not technically true, because if you go one generation forward onto the Super Famicom, things are a little bit different. Primarily, there was a remake of The Girl Who Stands Behind. So it's basically the same exact game, just with better visuals and audio, and yeah, you can see there's a lot more personality coming through. Like the characters move a little bit more with their eyes and whatnot. Like, again, atmosphere-wise, it looks really cool. And what's nice is if you do have a fascination with the Super Nintendo version, there is actually a fan translation that, if you really want to give these a shot and you don't want to go onto the Switch just yet, that's right there. You can give that a go and just admire the sprite work because, it's pretty good. Something about seeing the 80s or 90s anime style in a video game like this, I really like that. I like when games go for the classic anime aesthetic, which is something that, respectfully, to the newer remakes of Famicom Detective Club, don't have that aesthetic, so that's nice. But also, there was a third game that was only released on the Satellaview service, which, you always got to give a little bit of a background on this, but essentially, it was a video game that was broadcast rather than, just having a cartridge with the entire game just on it. It was broadcast in 3 different chapters in February of 1997, and it basically follows a lot of the same characters. Ayumi Takibana is once again investigating a murder. I believe her mother is being the one that is claimed to be the murderer, and that's not true, so you gotta solve the case. It's interesting that this game is left in the dustbins of obscurity, while the other two have a bit more of a spotlight on them. This game did not get any sort of fan translation, to what I can tell, so I really have not a whole lot of ideas as to what's going on in this plot. Maybe one day it would be cool to see this one resurface, because why not? Otherwise it's just trapped in the past, but yeah, there is technically a third Famicom Detective Club game. Outside of the original Famicom Disk System duology re-releasing for the Game Boy Advance in 2004, along with all the other Famicom and NES games that were getting released at that time, that was really it for the entirety of Famicom Detective Club. Ayumi Takibana would show up as a trophy in Super Smash Bros. Melee, which, back then when I saw this, I had no idea what this was. Melee was an introduction to so many different things in Nintendo's library that I had never heard of before, like Fire Emblem and Earthbound and Mother and all that stuff, so the fact that this is here, sure, they could say whatever they want and I'll believe them, because I had no idea what was going on back then. The fact that it's in there at all is cool, but it would be many more years for her to shine in a way that Americans and people in Europe would have any clue of what's going on here. Although the games did also release on the Virtual Console service in Japan for the Wii and the Wii U. The Wii U had the Famicom Disk System games as well as the Super Famicom remake, and I don't know, after seeing the Starfy game show up on the NSO apps, it'd be kinda cool. Even if it was totally untranslated, I don't know, just something about it would be cool. I would like it to be translated, but I guess that's what the Switch remakes are for. In 2021, for the Nintendo Switch, we got full-blown remakes of both Famicom Detective Club games, The Missing Heir and The Girl Who Stands Behind. And quite frankly, I've been saying this since these games came out, at least to myself, but these are some of the biggest surprises in the entire Nintendo Switch library, which quite frankly is filled with Nintendo surprises. Just the fact that they went back to these games that for the longest time were just such a very niche part of Nintendo history. They're about as niche as Urban Champion or Excitebike or, any game like that. Any really old, Nintendo game like Clue Clue Land is probably just as relevant as Famicom Detective Club at this point in time. But now we got full-blown with voice acting, new graphics, as well as an animation style that looks really good. The characters have so much more personality now. Upgraded music, a better UI, wow, this is really impressive stuff. I love this. This was great. Now, in their own bubble, yes, these are just very good detective-styled stories. They don't really waste any of your time, and yeah, there are some times you may need a bit of a help knowing what to do next, but it is otherwise fairly straightforward. It's a lot more straightforward than something like Ace Attorney, which I do love Ace Attorney. That game does kind of jump the shark a few times in terms of its plot. Here, it's very much more straightforward. There's something going on, you slowly unravel mysteries, and then you get to a conclusion. There's not anything crazy or mystical. It's just a very serene. I could see why back in the day the atmosphere was praised so much, because the atmosphere is very strong in these titles, and with the brand new presentation, this is just some great stuff. As for the stories themselves, I believe the best way to tackle them is to play The Missing Heir first and then The Girl Who Stands Behind afterwards, which is also a prequel to the previous game. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I was told early on that is the route to play these games, so why not? If you're interested, you probably should just get both, because they're usually bundled together on the eShop, and it's kind of cheaper that way, but you know, it's up to you. The Missing Heir starts with you actually waking up from amnesia, but it turns out you're a detective and you are investigating the murder of someone who is very high up in terms of power in this family, and a lot of crazy family shenanigans ensue, which is putting it very lightly, but it's a story game. I don't want to spoil nothing. And then the girl who stands behind goes for more of a creepy tale. There's this mysterious girl figure. You find a lot of ghostly rumors all over the place. There's a graveyard, stuff going on in the school. It's creepy. Either way, in my opinion, these are very good stories that have very cool and interesting mysteries and the motives behind what's going on. You get to learn a lot about what's going on in these families, and the environments, getting to explore a lot of Japan is really nice. It's just cool. They are two very cool visual novel video games. I don't think enough credit goes towards the animation style for these games. Like, when it comes to visual novels, you just very much expect just characters that are just standing directly in front of you, barely moving. Maybe their mouth moves. Like, once again, as an Ace Attorney fan, I admit that's all those games are. But the fact that these characters, you can see them breathing and moving just a little bit, it's nothing crazy and over the top. It's not a fully animated anime, but it's still really nice looking. And the fact that you finally get to see a glimpse of who Ayumi is all about, and they decided to make her a Smash trophy, I finally get to know what she's all about. Quite frankly, as a hardcore Nintendo fan, it was worthwhile for that alone, because that was just a mystery that had been in the back of my mind for decades. Another bright side of these games is they're a whole lot shorter than a typical visual novel. Like, Ace Attorney games can, take you like 20, 30 hours-ish, maybe. Famicom Detective Club, maybe 20 to 30 hours for both combined. They are a lot shorter, but it doesn't make them any less satisfying. They are still good, they just cram a whole lot more with less crazy plot twists in that amount of time. But one of the biggest issues with the release of these games is that there's no traditional physical print of it, which I never really understood why they went that route. I guess it was just such a big risk. Why waste the resources getting it out there physically? So for the most part, they are digital only. However, you may be thinking, okay, well, there was a physical in Japan. There's actually this very nice special edition in Japan that includes like an art book and whatnot, and it's just really, really nice. However, while most of the Japanese Switch cartridges, when you pop them into a Switch, do play in English, this is sadly one of those games where that is not the case, and I do not know why. If you import a physical from Japan, it's going to be in Japanese only, so that sucks. Your only option here is to go digital if you want to play the game in English, and I don't even think there's other language options at the moment, which is something else that should be addressed. Anyway, it's cool that it exists, but there's more that could be done, and evidently, you know, enough was done in terms of people purchasing this game, because yeah, we look forward only like a month now, and there is a brand new one. Like, that's wild, because we've just been working on the same Famicom Detective Club games from the 80s on the Famicom Disk System, and now we actually have a brand new game that's rated M. The previous ones were rated T, this one's rated M. It's going to deal with a lot more serious subject matter. I do like Emio a lot, the design with the creepy smile, the plot about girls who are upset, and then this serial murderer comes in and puts a mask on them with a permanent smile and then takes their life. Like, there's a lot of intrigue there, and I think one of the biggest intriguing moments going into this game's hype is in the announcement video. Sakamoto is saying like, hey, this is basically going to be the ultimate Famicom Detective Club. I knew exactly what I wanted this story to be. I think people are going to really like it. However, the ending is going to be pretty divisive, so I think people should play it to sort of come up to their own conclusion, and that is a very bold thing to say when you announce a game, is that the ending is going to be divisive, which, I don't know, that is something that appeals to me as someone who does kind of like visual novels, especially detective ones. I can only imagine what twisted stuff's going to go on here in Nintendo's very first ever rated M game. But yeah, it's not like the history of Famicom Detective Club has these weird twists and turns and like a crazy development history. It's just a series of mostly 2 games with a 3rd game kinda of detective stories that had 8-bit origins. It had a bit of an appearance in the 16-bit realm, and you know, some references here or there like in Smash, and now a brand new game. That's it. There's 3, technically 4 games in this franchise, and you can't even play one of them in English at the moment. So that's the thing, man. A whole lot of people, when it comes to Nintendo fans talking about wanting older IP or wanting brand new IP, quite frankly, I think this constitutes as both. because of how rarely we've ever gotten a Famicom Detective Club game. This could basically fill in a void that a new IP would have, because you likely haven't played something like this before. But if you are a hardcore Nintendo fan, great, it's a throwback to a classic 30-year plus IP. Sound off in the comments if you've played the remakes, maybe you played the originals too. Let me know what you think of these games, let me know what you think of Emio. Are you gonna pick the game up day one? I know I'm gonna be there. It may not have been a crazy new spooky IP from the Mario creators, but that's fine. I'm actually totally okay with how this is going to play out. And who knows, if this is successful, we can get a sequel called the Super Emio Brothers or something. I don't know, man. It's just cool.